Blog Talk Radio.
Well, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to yet another episode of XANDERMONIUM, the talk show that gets you talking. I'm your host, Xander Gibb, and we will be with you for the next 60 minutes discussing the real issues that affect America today. How will you cope? Don't forget to check out the Jake Pentland Show on Saturdays, 1 p.m. PST, 4 p.m. EST with Jake, Jen, and Eli and all the cult of Jake peeps. Yesterday they had on a superhero from Chicago, whose name escapes me. Very interesting episode yesterday. And right after my show, Timeout Seat with Brandy and Jenny, 3 p.m. PST, 6 p.m. EST. Also check out my sister from another Mr. Fallon Stone on the F Word X. Hot topics of discussion next Saturday are on racial identity and ideology. And if you're in the UK, please make sure to check out my dear friend Jeff Christian on Celebrity Big Brother's Bit on the Side. Wow, that's a mouthful. Also known as CBB Bots, every Wednesday and Friday for evictions till January 25th, which is the final. Follow him on Facebook and Twitter and tell him that Xander sent you. So in light of President Obama's recent recommendations in response to the upsurge in gun violence in the Union, we are today going to discuss the 9 points raised by his administration to attempt to somewhat combat this issue. There are so many sub-issues as part of this argument that I'm hearing around gun control, the right to life. Is the Second Amendment an outdated ethic? Bearing in mind it was written when the most lethal weapon around was a musket. The NRA's approval of armed guards in schools and suggestion that their backing is more about selling more guns and having more guns out there. And I guess the biggest bugbear I'm hearing is the fact that rights are being taken away as far as some people are concerned. Not that in any of this have I heard any suggestions about the banning of guns altogether. Surely nothing under consideration should infringe on the responsible gun owners. There are limitations on lots of things in life: driving, alcohol, the number of egress points in a venue, and drugs, etc. All of these things have been subject to change over the years for safety reasons. So why shouldn't the use of and acquisition of a gun be subject to those changes? Surely there's got to be a point to meet at that takes into account the rights of all and common sense. That remains to be seen. I am myself in favor of an executive order in this instance, should it be necessary, but this is another bone of contention for the gun lobby. And another point that someone pointed out to me just moments ago on Twitter: what is the plan regarding criminals who buy their assault weapons on the street? All of these things I hope we're going to look into. My panel today consists of Tony Lossaco, who's been on the show with us before. Hi, Tony, are you there?
Right here, Xander.
Hi, Tony. Tony's a libertarian and free thinker, and he's been on our show before when we talked about political matters. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Let's see who this person is. Hello, you're live on XANDERMONIUM. Who's this?
Hi, Xander. This is Brandon Combs. How are you?
Hi, Brandon. How are you? Can you tell people where you work and what job you do?
Sure. Well, I have a number of them, but amongst them are roles with the Second Amendment Foundation, which litigates a lot of these issues at the national level. And I also work with some groups out of California doing effectively the same thing. So a lot of civil rights litigation surrounding these issues.
Brilliant. And do you own a gun yourself?
I do, actually, yes.
You do? Cool. And my next guest is no stranger to our show. Hello.
Hi, Xander.
Are you there? Hi, Jen. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Welcome to the show, Jen Knight, libertarian and one of the founder members of the Real Feminists, back for a second visit to our show. Thanks so much to the panel for joining us today. Now, I don't expect that we're all going to agree on every single point. However, at XANDERMONIUM, we try to respect the opinions of others, even if we don't agree. I just want to ask you, Jen and Tony, before we go on, do either of you own a gun?
I do not own a gun.
Currently.
Right.
I'm working on acquiring one.
You're working on acquiring one. Cool. I actually just wanted to ask this of everybody before we started the discussion, so people could kind of get a broader idea of where people were coming from. So what I'd like to do, as you all know, what we're going to do today, we're going to look at the 9 points in brief that have been suggested by the Obama administration in order to make changes around the acquisition and ownership of a gun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out some notes about each point, and then we'll generate some discussion from there. Okay, so point number 1 is require background checks for all gun sales. One thing that can be done to prevent gun violence and mass shootings is to make sure those who would commit these acts cannot get access to guns. Federally licensed firearms dealers are required to run background checks, but studies estimate that nearly 40% of all gun sales are made by private sellers who are exempt from this requirement. A national survey of inmates found that only 12% of those who used a handgun in a crime acquired it from a retail store or a pawn shop where a background check should have been run. Should Congress pass legislation that goes beyond closing the gun show loophole to require background checks for all firearm sales with limited common sense exceptions in certain cases for things like transfers between family members, temporary transfers, and hunting and sporting purposes? Why shouldn't we have background checks? Surely only those with something to hide would need to be concerned. Is it so unreasonable that we want to know who's buying these firearms? Let me come to you first of all, Brendan. How do you feel about the firearms checks becoming more rigorous?
Well, what does rigorous mean exactly? I mean, what we're talking about here is the gun show loophole is really just a misnomer. What they're talking about is banning private sales altogether.
Right.
And so they came up with this, gun show loophole term because it, sells newspapers and such. So what we're really talking about is the banning of all private sales.
Right.
So starting from there, I don't think that that's really a tenable political position at this time. However, could they, perhaps draft a law that would change the background check system and open up the NICS checks to private citizens so private parties can run background checks from home? Yeah, right. I think that's probably something politically they could do.
Right. Jen, what about you? Do you think that the checks are suitable? Should they be more rigorous? What do you think that they should include? Are these an infringement on people's personal information? How do you feel about it?
I just don't see how it's enforceable to ban private sales of guns, which, like Brandon said, is essentially what it would do. There's just no way that can be enforced. And I think that like Brandon said, being able as a responsible gun owner, if you're going to sell it privately, to be able to look online and say, hey, I know I don't want to sell it to this person, that would be a great step.
Right, yep. Absolutely. Because I think that this, as I said at the foot of the show, this kind of, it's like a lot of things that where changes have to be made. It affects the responsible users or people that are involved in things. It affects them just as much as the people that it's trying to prevent.
Well, actually, it affects them more because the only people following the law are those that would intend to anyway. And Xander, I'm sure you've got some experience in digital rights management, for example, in music.
Right.
What were the lessons that we learned with music? If you want people to follow the law and see you, you've got to make it cheap and accessible, right? So we should take these sort of behavioral lessons that we've learned in other mediums and make sure that we don't forget those.
Right. But music sales and people downloading music illegally would not cause the loss of life. I mean, I see the analogy, but I think that's kind of a lot lower down on the scale, really.
Well, I think a lot of people would debate that. I don't have any intention of doing so because I'm a civil libertarian myself. So
right.
Sure. So I guess the point I'm driving at here is if you want people to actually use the background check system, make it very, very cheap or free, and make it accessible.
Right. I absolutely see that point because a lot of the changes that are made by government, like for instance, areas you can park in certain cities, are not about accessibility for anybody in particular or for emergency vehicles. It's about making more money for the government. So I totally agree with that point. Tony, let's come to you. How do you feel about changes proposed in these background checks?
Well, on the surface, I agree with background checks for sure, but I don't claim to know everything, and I'd like to ask the other two panelists because I honestly don't know, and perhaps I need some more information before I form an opinion entirely on it.
Right.
How is it that the background checks are going to ban private sales of guns? Because I'm not understanding that, and I'm not being sarcastic or anything. I honestly don't. I read the news like everybody in the headlines, and I'm not sure I have a clear understanding of how a background check would ban private sales of guns.
Maybe you could fill that for Tony Branding.
Yeah, let me help. I think I can help a little bit here. So there's two things. First of all, we really don't know what the president's prong number one of this 9-point plan really means. So part of the problem that we have here today is we're all kind of speculating and reading tea leaves. What's possible. So some of this is just purely speculatory anyway. But based upon what the Mayors Against Illegal Guns, Brady campaign, and others have advocated for in the past, I think it's fair to assume that what they're really looking for is for all gun sales to be routed through agents rather than private party sales as they stand today.
And you wouldn't have so much of a problem with that if it was a free thing. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think that what I mean to say is that, for example, look, let's just say that you and I want to engage in a firearm transaction, right?
Right.
So let's just say there was a system where I could go online. Maybe it's an iPhone app, right? I go online, we do the background check, both of us get confirmation, everybody's cleared. At that point, you've actually got a very, very accessible system that's not costing anybody, a substantive amount of money, if anything at all.
Right.
There's no time delays, and so you have the effect of the law making sure that people are being checked while not making it so burdensome that people don't use it.
Right, absolutely. Because this kind of feeds into point two about strengthening the background checks, because basically the Obama administration is saying that it's been effective and efficient for the past 14 years and has kept like 1.5 million guns out of the wrong hands. But one of the things that they're looking to add to this background check is about making mental health records attainable, viewable to the people making the decision whether you should be able to own a gun. And this is the Government Accountability Office that are saying that, 17 states have made fewer than 10 mental health records available to the background system. Now,
Xander, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, how far back should they be delving? Who should be of interest? What is considered to be mental health? I'm sure that most of us have had some level of counseling. Should that prohibit us from owning a gun? Again, this comes back to what you were saying, Brandon, about reading tea leaves. although there's a clear need for change, the clarity of some of these suggestions need further investigation.
Well, let me take a step back here and pause for a moment. When they're talking about mental health records, I think that they need to really clarify what their intent is here.
Right.
Are they talking about those who have been adjudicated as mentally defective? And let's be very clear. We're talking about people who've gone through an antagonistic process, a legal process. There was a judge or a panel or a commission or something that they had a chance to advocate for their position.
Right.
Perhaps they even had counsel. So, there's a big difference between someone that's been, institutionalized or adjudicated as defective, and those that seek, counseling for a bump in the road. I mean, how many millions of Americans sought counseling for depression following the loss of their jobs in this economy?
Exactly.
Should that be sufficient to remove a fundamental right? I think not.
I mean, and this also kind of it's a little bit like when you're working in the governmental system and they put you through a police check. There are only there is so much that slips through the loophole, because with that they only find the things that you've actually been prosecuted for. So with regards to mental health, what about the people that have never actually been deemed to have a mental health issue that would prohibit them from owning guns? So that there are some flaws in this. Tony, you were going to make a point. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Tony. Go ahead.
Yes, actually, and I'm sorry. Basically, as a mental health professional, I have a bigger fear of that proposal than the background checks. Right. And the devil is in the details sometimes.
Absolutely.
That could be used to actually take away the Second Amendment, which nobody's looking at. I mean, financially, would everybody have to go out and go to a medical doctor to get a mental health check, to have a doctor certify them, for instance? Right. And as far as mental health, I mean, you look back at history, I hate to mention Germany or whatever, but the excuse has been used through every regime that's oppressed people as a libertarian: mental health disorder. And I have a much greater concern with doing a mental health screening on people that want a gun. And once again, it goes back to what you said, Xander. Who qualifies then and who doesn't qualify, and who are we entrusting to make those decisions with our freedoms? Whereas a background check, a criminal background check, just seems like common sense to me. Mental health, that door could actually lead to banning guns like people fear.
And one of the things that's just been pointed out in the chat room is who gets to decide what is mental illness? Where is that benchmark? Is it someone that's had counseling? Is it someone that's been sectioned? Is it is it more, on the lines of what Brandon was saying?
Well, that gets into slippery waters there.
To that point, it depends. I mean, the statutory schemes are different from state to state. Perhaps the national government will have a standard and preempt all the states. At the end of the day, the people that will decide who is and who is not prohibited from exercising their fundamental rights will be the United States Supreme Court. Right.
Absolutely. And someone else just said in the chat room that if you're on antidepressants, you're probably that's probably going to cause issues too. I think sometimes it's a concern that in this country we have some laws that are at a federal level and some laws are actually left down, to the individual states. I mean, some states won't let you have a gun. You're not allowed to have a gun if you have a medical marijuana license. And others, you can't.
That's actually a federal law.
Right. That's a federal law?
That's federal, yeah.
Right.
If you have a medical marijuana license in your state, federal government doesn't care. They say you're a prohibited person, period.
Right. Right, absolutely. So there are a lot of people that would even just, that kind of cancels down who could get a gun already. So let's look at the next point, which is about passing a new ban on assault weapons. Now, the government is saying that the shooters in Aurora and Newtown used a type of semi-automatic rifle where the target of assault weapons, the assault weapons ban was in place from 1994 to 2004. And NBC recently claimed that this was not the case in Newtown, however. The ban was an important step, but manufacturers circumvented this prohibition with cosmetic modifications to the weapons. Now, one thing I found out recently, because I think knowledge is power, was that not all automatic weapons are actually assault weapons. Like, for example, the police use automatic weapons because apparently these don't require cocking in order to reload. But assault weapons, however, can fire up to 36 rounds with one squeeze. I mean, I don't honestly, let me ask you, Jen, do you think that any person on the street, any ordinary citizen actually needs an assault weapon? Are you there, Jen?
Can we lose Jen?
Let me just see on the studio page. Hello? Are you there, Jen?
Hi. Yes,
Hi. I don't know what happened. You went on to hold. Did you hear my question?
I did. I heard, but I think that there's some kind of misconceptions within the question, and I'd like to have Brandon's take on it.
Okay.
First, he's more of an expert than I am.
These are the first place we have to start here in the conversation, because it's important. Words matter. And Xander, I appreciate that you acknowledge that right out of the gate. So truly, I mean, it's nice to chat with somebody that's acknowledging these important points. So this term assault weapon is really a mischaracterization of these firearms. The firearms that they're talking about banning, and which New York just passed a ban on, are common semi-automatic firearms. It's one shot fired for every pull of the trigger. True assault weapons are fully automatic or burst weapons that have been highly regulated since 1934 and effectively banned since 1986. Civilians do not have, by and large, these assault weapons, except in very rare cases where the federal government already has licensed you, you've done significant background checks, and then only if you live in a state where you can have one.
Right.
So what are we talking about? What we're really talking about is common semi-automatic firearms that are functionally identical and technologically and materially identical to the firearms that have been in existence and in common use in the United States for self-defense and for other purposes, sporting and hunting, for over 100 years. I mean, we're talking about things that are not new. These are not military style. These are the most popular firearms in the United States.
Right.
In California, over 2,000 AR-15 style rifles are sold every day. These are not uncommon. And so what we really are looking at here is that they're looking to outright ban some of the most popular and common self-defense firearms in America.
Right.
And that is really the bottom line.
I mean, I think that even myself, I don't own a gun. I don't want to own a gun. I actually don't like guns. But I kind of think it's important to educate yourself on the difference. And I thought that any automatic weapon what was the issue, but did not realize that there's a vast difference between an automatic weapon and an assault weapon. So I think that the general public kind of really doesn't know the difference. Sorry, Tony, you were going to say something.
Well, and a lot of it gets into technicalities as far as the terminology and the language, which honestly I'm about as up on it as yours, Xander. However, the bottom line for me, I think Governor Cuomo of New York State said it best, and he's a gun owner himself. Common sense needs to prevail here. You don't need those high-powered weapons to hunt a deer. You don't need them for any reason. A gun's purpose is to kill. That's the sole purpose.
And Tony, the Second Amendment is not about shooting deer. The Second Amendment is about self-defense. And if these guns weren't useful for self-defense, and if all they're good for is killing, then why do the cops use them?
Right.
Well, the Second Amendment, though, and that gets back into another topic, was written when we did not have these weapons. And see, I'm not,
right.
Perhaps the president's gone about this. Perhaps the president's gone about it in a different way than I would have personally have liked. I would have liked to have seen a process which given to the American people to amend the Constitution, to say, hey, do we want this or do we not? This was written, and there were revolvers and muskets.
Tony, that would be a very amusing outcome, because if you ask the people of the United States if they're willing to give up a fundamental right, they will respond overwhelmingly no.
Fundamental right. You can't have a fundamental right that did not exist when the Constitution was written. These weapons were not thought of or even imagined back then. So you can't say that was a fundamental right when they wrote the Constitution. That weapon wasn't conceived of, so there was no way for that type of weapon to be a fundamental right.
Tony, let me read you a quick paragraph from the Supreme Court decision in 2008, where the Second Amendment was found to be an individual right. And the Supreme Court said, some have made the argument, bordering on the frivolous, that only those arms in existence in the 18th century are protected by the Second Amendment. We do not interpret constitutional rights that way. Just as the First Amendment protects modern forms of communication, and the Fourth Amendment applies to modern forms of speech, the Second Amendment extends prima facie to all instruments that constitute bearable arms. That's what the Supreme Court said.
And that was the Supreme Court that said that? And they were so right about Obamacare.
But let me pose a question to you all. Do you not think that when our forefathers were writing the Constitution, that they saw it as a working document? Do you think they saw this as something that was set in stone forever? Because I personally don't. Times change, things change. That's why there are even amendments, because it's a working document.
That's a very academic conversation, and the reality is the Supreme Court has already determined where the Second Amendment stands with respect to modern firearms and modern technologies. Our radio program that we're speaking on today is protected by the First Amendment.
Right.
Was radio and internet radio particularly available to the framers of the Constitution? No, and it would be silly to argue that our speech is not protected because it didn't exist in the 1700s.
The Supreme Court, though, also, it's silly to argue that the Supreme Court's word is right when they have changed their mind numerous times. For instance, they once defined slavery as legal. I mean, the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution at the time. That doesn't mean that their interpretation at the time is correct. In fact, the court has been known to change its mind and reverse its decisions. Obamacare is a good example of that.
Well, I think we're getting a little bit
about the law.
Right. I think we're getting a little bit off topic with regards to constitutional issues. But let's go back and look at point number 4, which again is very related. Limiting the ammunition magazines to 10 rounds. Now, the case for prohibiting high capacity magazines has apparently been proven over and over. The shooters at Virginia Tech, Tucson, Aurora, Oak Creek, and Newtown all use magazines holding more than 10 rounds, which would have been prohibited under the 1994 law. These magazines,
they would not have been prohibited under that law. You got to remember that the government can't just take away property that you own. They would have to pay you for it. So is the government, are we talking about the government buying all of these hundreds of millions of existing large capacity magazines or standard capacity magazines, as most are? No, the government's going to leave them out there. We're not talking about a functional anything here. We're talking about another reactionary law that doesn't work.
Right. So should Congress should Congress reinstate the prohibition on magazines holding more than 10 rounds? Why does anybody outside of the military or police need this?
For the same reasons that the military and police have them.
Right.
I mean, if they're using them for self-defense, then that's the exact reason that we need them too.
Right. So you're saying that because they're already out there, is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I'm saying that the effectiveness of a ban of any proposed legislation, unless they bought them all or something along those lines, it would be a non-starter from that perspective. But
right.
From the perspective of need, we need them for self-defense for the same reasons that military and police have.
But why do we need a magazine with more than 10 rounds?
Because again, to take a step back, if you're a woman defending her home and you have children and you have multiple assailants, do you really want to be limited to 10 rounds, or is that 17-round magazine that came standard with your firearm?
It's a concern because. I'll tell you why it's a concern, and then I'm going to come to Jen and ask Jen for her opinion. But it's a concern for me because in that moment you have to make a split-second decision, and sometimes we don't make that right decision. And if you can squeeze and pump out 36 bullets, you could end up killing 36 people or more. But
you can't.
Go on.
You
say
can't
again.
Squeeze. You can't squeeze and pump out 36. You have to squeeze one time for each bullet that comes out.
With an assault rifle? Or what are you talking about?
No, with a semi-automatic, with an AR, anything semi-automatic, we can't have the fully automatic. So
right.
Anything that we can have, you have to pull the trigger one time for each bullet that comes out. So if I've read multiple things in the news this week of women defending their home against intruders and having children. I have 3 children, and one of them is old enough to get a rifle, but say I'm the only one there. I want to have that ability, and hopefully I'm going to be able to be in the moment to make the right decision each time I squeeze that trigger.
Right.
But it's not going to be an accidental anything.
You see,
I just don't like the government trying to decide what I need. That's not their place.
I agree, but
right,
I'm sure.
And they
But there has to be. But when people are using weapons and going out and committing mass shootings, we need to readdress the situation. Surely.
But hold on,
I'm not
Xander.
saying. Let me just finish my point. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be allowed guns because that's the law of the land that we should be allowed guns. But
right.
But surely we have to give some consideration to who is having those guns.
And if law-abiding people own large-capacity magazines, they're not going to put the world at any greater or lesser risk than a 10-round magazine. The reality is what we're really talking about doing is burdening law-abiding gun owners with having to buy new magazines that have reduced capacity and lesser capacity to defend their lives. And so I'm not quite sure how it's anywhere near common sense to be punishing the law-abiding gun owners. Well, we know that the criminals are going to do what they want anyway.
Well, see, the thing with law-abiding gun owners, and once again, I know there's been cases, for instance, the tragic shooting that just occurred, where there was something mentally ill. But how do you define law-abiding? Because people snap. I mean, they don't tend to win. It's those law-abiding gun owners that are sane one day, but then the guy loses his job, his house has a psychotic break, but he's got the gun, and then he goes and he shoots his office up. That I'm worried about. I feel safer around the criminals because they don't tend to do the mass shootings.
And
they tend to shoot each other.
That seems pretty irrational, considering Chicago. But let's take a step back for a second here. What you're saying is that we don't know if people are going to commit a law. So what you're actually arguing for is banning everything, in fact, not just guns, because any one of us could at any moment become some heinous criminal. And we live in a society where we are presumptively innocent. We don't lock people up and put them in camps because they might be working for the enemy.
But see, you're warping what I said because you're warping what I said in a way, though, because, see, and I've heard the argument not from yourself, of course, well, pencils kill people, desk lamps kill people. Well, they're not made to kill people. Guns have one purpose, which is to kill. And I'm not saying, we lock everybody up. I'm saying you cannot determine with a weapon that is made specifically to kill, and not just kill, because we're not talking about revolvers and muskets once again. We're talking about high-capacity weapons and ammunition whose purpose it is to kill the maximum number of people. You're not shooting deer with those weapons. The purpose is to kill.
You said that a couple of times.
You cannot guarantee who's going to snap with a weapon like that.
And I have no idea what point you're making, because we don't build precog laws. We don't try to guess in advance what somebody's going to do. It's some sort of an atrocious act. We punish crimes when they happen.
We don't, but I think that as a responsible society, we need to actually look at possibilities. If that weren't the case, then we wouldn't.
If you want to get rid of the Fourth Amendment,
just let me finish my point. If that weren't the case, then we wouldn't have things like speed limits. We wouldn't have age limits for things. These are all because of potential things that may happen. There has to be some level. What?
When do we ticket somebody for speeding?
When they've speeded, but the reason why we have speed limits is because it's dangerous to drive.
After they do the horrible act. We don't punish law-abiding people in advance. We don't send tickets to everybody with a driver's license because they could speed.
No, but your argument is flawed there, because that's like saying why have speed limits then? It's only people that break the speed limits that need to be ticketed. The speed limits are there in order to protect people, and I think that's the idea behind having some changes. You see, I'm not totally behind all of these recommendations, but I think that something has to change, because if nothing changes, then we're still going to end up with 26 kids killed in school. You know, that to me should be at the forefront of our minds. And these are not isolated incidents anymore. They're happening more and more.
Absolutely.
So,
and you know what? And guns save lives.
It's indicative of a need for change. It's indicative of a need for change.
The FBI data and Dr.
The thing is, if you talk over me, I can't hear you, so you need to say that again.
I was going to say that Dr. Gary Kleck, it is on the forefront of our mind. In fact, it's on the forefront of our minds when we're considering this fundamental right of self-defense that saves over 2,000 people every day. So what we really need to be thinking about is talking about how we're going to regulate a fundamental right, and which of those 2,000 people that guns save every day are going to die because of whatever laws we create. That's what we need to be thinking about here.
Right. I think that, you know, that as I said at the foot of the show, there has to be a point of the meeting of the minds, and I think that there is far too much. This is why I looked into this even deeper, because it's important to have facts about what you're commenting on. And even some of the things I thought were not the case, you know? It's so important to have a basic knowledge of these things before you talk about them, because I think that otherwise we're kind of like, you know, we're peeing into the wind, really.
And see, Xander, some of the other... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, John.
I was going to say, of course, all of us are thinking of those children and of all the people whose lives are saved every day from being able to defend themselves. But when we're looking at what to do legally about this, we need to look at what's effective and what's constitutional. We don't want to just come up with these recommendations and laws just to feel good that we did something to pass these laws or these different background things.
I agree. That's why I think there has to be a point. That's why there has to be a point of meeting of minds. Surely there has to be some point.
Let me ask you a question. Let me frame it in a different context. We're talking about fundamental rights here. Fundamental rights are about the right. It's not about consensus. The reason why we protect the rights in the Bill of Rights is because they're scary and they're dangerous. The right of speech, the right to have an abortion. These are things that actually have real cause and effect in reality.
They do.
So these are not consensus items. These are rights, and we must protect them because when we come to a meeting of the minds, that's a democratic process that's taking away things that are absolutely critical for our free society to work.
But when do your rights supersede mine, Brandon? When does your right?
I was just gonna.
When does your right to have a gun? When does someone's right to have a gun that shoots off that's got that potential supersede my right to live? When did the rights of that gunman in Newtown, Connecticut, supersede the rights of those 26 kids to live their full life?
You just took all the words out of my mouth.
Some rights are in conflict with one another.
Many rights are in tension with each other. That's why we have criminal laws that punish people that abuse their rights. And first of all, these aren't people that are law-abiding. These are people that are insane that should have been in a mental institution or been treated. So let's take a step back here. These sorts of the mass murders are not being committed by the people, the law-abiding gun owners of the United States. They're being committed by evil or insane people that want to create these sort of big headlines. So, if you're going to create a law to affect gun control, are they, the insane people, going to be listening to you?
Well, probably not. But the thing is that wait. You asked me a question. Let me answer it for you. But where it starts is with the general population. You see, you're not talking. I agree with you. These people that have committed these heinous acts are clearly not, kind of normal people with normal mental health. There's obviously, if you're going to go into somewhere and kill a bunch of people, there's obviously something wrong. And one of the points that we'll get to at the end of these recommendations is around mental health. So it is a circular logic, I think, Brendan. I don't think anyone is trying to take away the rights of anyone to own a gun, but surely it's not wrong to have some limitations on the acquisition and the use of that gun.
You're absolutely right. And you're absolutely right. And that's why we have laws that say that violent criminals and the insane that have been adjudged insane can't own them or possess them.
But we don't always catch the ones that are violent and insane in time. People do snap, or people get weapons that are mentally ill, as we've just seen recently from people who the background checks and everything have said are law-abiding, and then they steal, or they have other people get those weapons for them, and then they use them to kill other people.
Absolutely. Let's move it along a little.
Unfortunately, we can't regulate acts that have not happened yet. I mean, people do snap.
But you keep saying that, Brandon. But of course we can, because that's what hindsight is all about. We can regulate potential dangers. That's why not everybody that goes onto a building site is going to get hit on the head by a brick, but that's why we wear a safety helmet in the unfortunate event that might happen.
It's the same reason why we carry guns every day. Millions of Americans carry guns every day for the same reason that we wear hard hats and have fire extinguishers at home, the reason we have safety belts in cars.
Right.
But by that thinking, then we should all go out and own guns, and we should be back to the Wild West, and everybody in the United States should own a gun to defend ourselves, and we will all have guns, and then let's release law enforcement, because we won't need them. We'll just settle it amongst ourselves. Let's get rid of all the police officers that are there to defend us, and just everybody will own a gun, and if somebody breaks into my house, I'm defending myself, or vice versa, and we've seen how well that went in Florida with that young man, Trayvon Martin, when people own guns.
So you do have the right to own a gun and protect your home today. That's your choice. If you choose not to, that's also your choice.
It is.
Yes,
it is. But there should also be with gun ownership comes responsibility, and obviously, so for instance, the guy in Newtown, Connecticut, that went into that school. They weren't even his guns; they were his mother's guns. I mean, why would anybody leave guns accessible to someone with mental health issues? To me, that's just crazy.
He killed his mother. He killed his mother and then stole the guns.
Well, no. He must have stolen the gun first, because how would he have got access to the gun?
Got a hold of a gun. But we're talking about, look, can banks still get robbed, and even having the best vaults that money can buy? Of course they do. Criminals find ways to achieve evil ends. That's what they do.
But you can make it harder for them.
do we have software that keeps Trojan horses and stuff like that out of our computers with stagnant definitions, or do we update them every day? We update them every day because criminals consistently find new and creative ways to achieve their outcomes.
Absolutely, and that's why I said at the foot of the show about what the point that Rick made on Twitter about what plan are we going to have for people buying illegal guns. But just so we can keep to our time, because time is slipping away from us, let's go to the next point. I also want to give out the number. If you have any comments on this program about gun control issues and the 9-point plan that the Obama administration is planning to put into practice, call us on, where's my number, 347-884-9061, 347-884-9061. Give us a call. Tell us what you think. If you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to call in and ask us. That number there again is 347-884-9061. Now, point number 5 was finish the job of getting armor-piercing bullets off the streets. Apparently, it's already illegal to manufacture and import armor-piercing ammunition, except for military or law enforcement use. Okay, but it's generally still not illegal to possess or transfer this dangerous ammunition. Should Congress be able to finish the job of protecting law enforcement and the public by banning the possession of armor-piercing ammunition and its transfer to anyone other than the military or law enforcement? Let me go to Jen, first of all, about this issue. Are you there, Jen?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that part of it.
You don't.
Short answer.
No, I would agree. I mean, it's kind of scary that these bullets actually exist. I mean, who actually needs armor-piercing bullets? And Tony, please don't say someone that wants to pierce armor.
No.
Brandon, let's come to you. How do you feel about this issue? Do you agree that Congress?
I think, again, the devil's in the details. Is the president saying that he supports a plan where Congress passes a law and buys this ammunition that's possessed by American people from them at market value? That's a different proposition than simply saying we're going to take your private property without due process and without compensation. So right. I suppose I want to start from the basis of what is he actually planning to do here.
Right.
I simply don't know by reading his bullet point.
And you know something? I completely agree with you on that, Brandon. I think the devil is in the details on this, because what we have to look at is if they ban these magazines, well, what about all the ones already on the streets? The government has a very bad habit of passing laws in hysteria, I think we can all agree, that makes it look like it fixes the problem, but it really doesn't address the core issues. And I think that's why we need a well-rounded discussion here, so we don't just have something that looks nice, that sounds nice to appease the papers and the newspapers and have everybody feel good about themselves, but in reality does not solve the problem.
Absolutely. Okay, let's look at point number 6. I'm rushing it along a little because of time, but the point number 6 says give law enforcement additional tools to prevent and prosecute gun crime. In order to prevent and respond to gun violence, the administration believes that they must give law enforcement every tool they need to keep us safe. That includes passing stronger laws to stop those who would put guns in the hands of criminals, keeping 15,000 cops on the street, and eliminating restrictions that keep federal law enforcement from doing its job. Now, even though there's quite a bit of detail in that, the first thing that jumped into my mind was, my God, this is going to be the part of the process is going to be that they're going to be able to execute like military law and things like that. Again, it's not clear exactly what those new tools will be.
Right.
Tony, let's
totally
go
agree.
to Tony.
Excuse me, Xander?
Sorry, let's go to Brandon first, and then we'll come to you, Tony.
Okay.
Well, I agree with you. I think the devil, again, is in the details here. We simply don't know what he's saying. There's an awful lot of words that aren't really detailing any particular proposals and laws. What sort of infringements of civil liberties, potentially Fourth Amendment type stuff are we talking about here? We have no idea, and so I don't like to read tea leaves on stuff like this. I think he should detail his plan, and we can respond to that.
Right. But to just confirm this for anybody that might be unclear, you're not saying, Brandon, that you don't feel that no changes. You don't feel that no changes are necessary, do you? You're not saying that it should stay the way that it is. There is room for some change and improvement in all of this, isn't there?
I do think that there is room for improvement. Yes, I do, and I think it needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be methodical, and we need to really think through what works and what doesn't. We do know that mental health is a place where we've really, really fallen off here in the United States.
Absolutely.
We really need to make sure that mental health resources are available to people. So that's where I would start.
Tony, over to you.
Well, as far as mental health goes, that's a double-edged sword for me, first of all, being in the mental health before.
Let me just stop you there. We haven't got to the mental health point. We're discussing about additional tools and powers, etc., to enable law enforcement to prevent and prosecute gun crime.
I tend to think the more power we give law enforcement, and this is just as, and it's funny because as a libertarian, I'm directly at odds with most libertarians on the gun issue as it is being for gun control. But I tend to think you get in a slippery slope when you give the state more police powers to begin with. For instance, the 10-20 life laws are a travesty in my book. And when you start to talk about giving the police and law enforcement more power, you are going down a very dangerous slope. What is the power? What are the limits? What are the rights of individuals, poor minorities, underrepresentation? You get into so many different issues of inequality of laws in the criminal justice system that I think that's a dangerous road to go down as well.
Absolutely, and we end up being in danger of being in NDAA territory. What's next? The police can actually say, we think that you're selling guns, so we're going to keep you for an unlimited period of time. I mean, the NDAA. I don't want to get into that today, but that was an executive order that was signed in and frightens the life out of me. I mean, I've been a lifelong Democrat, and I'm moving into the middle over the past couple of years, but it concerns me when more powers are given to law enforcement without a clear indication of what that's going to be. Jen, how do you feel about that?
Well, as far as the additional tools for law enforcement, like everyone else has said, I'd want to hear proposals, but I think that one thing that they can do right away is when they have gun buybacks, go ahead and trace those guns that they have to see if they've been used in a gun crime and find those people, because currently in California that's not done. They don't do any ballistics check on those weapons.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it is a concern, and surely the issue with a lot of this is about illegal weapons. I mean, I don't know the statistics, but I'm sure that it falls more towards illegal guns than legal guns in these instances. I know that there was a license held by this guy's mother that was responsible for the shooting in Connecticut, but I've not really looked at the figures for all of the other mass shootings. Do you have any information on that, Brandon?
Well, what we know is, for example, with respect to carry license holders that are carrying loaded firearms in public every day, in Texas, and I know we referenced the Wild West earlier, but the Wild West really wasn't that wild if you actually look at the numbers. And in Texas not only has an exceedingly low, the Texas carry license holders are by a significant factor less likely to commit crime than the general public.
Right.
So we do have data points like that suggest that the people that are carrying guns every day are not those that are apt to commit crime.
Right, because the majority of, I know lots of people that have guns. That people, I was in a diner after going to a bar a few months ago with a friend, and he said, I'm never worried about any trouble. He said, I carry a gun, and that shocked me. He said, I've never had to use it. but it's more for my own protection and the protection of the people I'm around. He said you would be surprised at how easy people are scared. You know, if people are going to attack you and you say, look, I have a gun, they're gone. They're on the heels, you know?
And you know something, Xander? There is, a balanced approach, like you said, I believe. There was, I can't remember what state it was, where a gun did save lives in a shooting instance, and it didn't even make the headlines, even
we
with
the
movie theaters similar. No, we don't hear about that.
There are there are important arguments and important points on each side. Let me come to the next point because time is moving on. Number 7 was end the freeze on gun violence research. There are approximately 30,000 firearm-related homicides and suicides a year, a number large enough to make clear that it's a public health crisis, according to the administration. But for years, the Centers for Disease Control and other scientific agencies have been barred from using funds to advocate or promote gun control. Research on gun violence, they're saying, is not advocacy. The president is directing the CDC and other research agencies to conduct research into the causes and prevention of gun violence, and the CDC is announcing that they will begin this research. Let's come to you first, Jen. Do you think it's a good thing to end the research on gun violence, and do you feel that the research is advocacy in any way?
Research can always be advocacy. There's companies and associations that are sponsoring research all the time.
Right.
My opposition to it is more on just a fiscal level. I don't think that a lot of the things that the government pays for research on, that the government should be doing that it should be private institutions, colleges. If it's a public health issue, there's all kinds of masters of public health programs around the country that can study it without congressional dollars. It's not preventing anyone from studying it.
Right. Yeah, and I think sometimes the results of research actually depend on who's paying for it. Like when the NRA pays for research, it's mostly kind of cocked towards their thinking and ideology, as it were.
And same with the Brady Group.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I wasn't I was just using the NRA as one example. Tony, how do you feel about that? Do you believe that gun research is necessarily advocacy, and do you think the ban should be lifted?
I completely agree with Jen. My opposition to it is on a fiscal level as well. I don't think it's the government's place to do that. There's plenty of private institutions to do that. And exactly what you said, research, being in the field of, counseling, they teach us about research. Research can be slanted any way you want it to, and this year's statistic and this year's survey and study is contradicted by next year. So I don't think that that's any bit of solution to anything other than more debt problems.
Right, absolutely. Brandon.
Well, I think everybody's got I think the right idea here. First of all, we just don't know who's doing the research and how the funds are being funneled, and so I'm always a bit skeptical whenever the government says, "Hey, we're going to throw money at this. We're looking for results." I'm just innately skeptical of those sorts of proposals. We just don't know what, in the level of detail they've given us, we don't know what sort of research they're proposing, who would be actually doing the research. So there's an awful lot of questions here.
Absolutely. Who's beeping? Is somebody getting another call?
I'm sorry.
It's fine.
I had to.
Hello?
I'm in the car, sorry.
You're in the car. I hope you're not talking and driving, Jen.
For my Bluetooth, I'm fully California legal.
All right, well, we'll save that for another episode. All right, let's move to point number 8. They want to make our schools safer with new resource officers and counselors, better emergency response plans, and more nurturing school climates. The administration is calling on Congress to help schools hire up to 1,000 more social resource officers, school psychologists, social workers, and counselors, as well as making other investments in school safety. They also want to make sure every school has a comprehensive emergency management plan. Why they wouldn't have one already, I don't know, so that they are prepared to respond to situations like mass shootings. In addition, they're looking to help 8,000 schools put in place proven strategies to prevent violence and improve climate by reducing bullying, drug abuse, violence, and problem behaviors. I think those things at the end were just kind of tagged on for the sake of it myself, but, you know, there's no mention in these plans for armed officers in schools, although that this has been suggested in lots of places. Whilst it's amicable that they're suggesting these things, these things I think should be done as a standard anyway to improve all schools. But how do we feel about armed guards in schools? Let's start with you, Tony.
Oh, well, I absolutely, completely agree with the NRA on that. In fact, I think we should have put watchtowers up in the schools with snipers and razor wire as well. And, you know, we should install video monitors and have all the students wear bulletproof vests, because that will make our schools safer. And yes,
are you being serious or are you being sarcastic?
No, I'm being completely sarcastic.
Right.
The day that we need to have armed guards in our schools to protect our children is the day we shouldn't be sending our children to school anymore. And that's how I feel about that, and I feel very strongly. There was a resource officer stationed at Columbine on campus at the time. He did not prevent it. Fact. Well,
I think that's a pretty fair point, that police don't prevent crime, they respond to them and write reports. So I think that's a fair point.
Wow, we actually found something you guys agreed on. Jen?
I think it should be a local issue as far as any armed guards. Where my children have gone to school in North Carolina, they have resource officers at the middle and high schools that do carry weapons. Right. So it's they have someone there, and I think it's good to be a local thing. As in guns?
Sorry to interrupt you. As in guns, or? They have
guns. They school resource officers in the middle and high schools in the county my kids go to school to in North Carolina, and it's the local school board to know what that local area needs, and that should be part of their emergency plan. You know, and more federal dollars for all this. Like college, to me, that's just so much more bureaucratic red tape.
Absolutely.
It should be on a local level.
And all those things tagged on to the end about bullying, to me, I mean, you know, Jen, you guys know that I've kind of been very pro-Obama on a lot of things, but to me, all that was just tagged on to the end for kind of like, you know, let's tip this a little bit further about the bullying and things like that. Not that I'm saying that these aren't real issues, but I think they've just kind of been tagged on. Marvin in the chat room, he says he thinks we need trained ninjas in schools. That would be better. And I think that's
my 9-year-old son would absolutely adore having a ninja in his school.
Yeah. Can you imagine a ninja patrolling the halls? You wouldn't dare. There would be no bullying because they would just be like a foot at your throat, like ready to give you an emergency tracheotomy.
Perhaps a Kung Fu Panda.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring it on. And just one more point I want to make about that before we move on. Shouldn't schools already have some kind of emergency plan in place to cover every eventuality in this day and age? I know when I was doing my training back in the UK, the first day that I ever worked in a school, we went through every worst eventuality plan. If there's a fire, if there's an intruder, if there's this, shouldn't schools already have something in place?
I think most
Everyone
do,
that
actually.
I've been to does, yeah.
Yes.
They do.
Right.
I think a lot of this gets into...
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of this, you alluded to it earlier, a lot of this gets into the government just not being able to help itself but want to spend more money for useless things.
Right.
And just personal opinion, we don't want to use this tragedy and this issue and this debate as an excuse to give the government a bigger American Express card.
Right. Yeah, Joe was just saying in the chat room that they do earthquake drills several times a year in California. I know any school that I've worked in, they've done a fire drill like once every few weeks, and not told them that it's a drill, just to kind of see how how good it is. But I agree with the point that you're making, Tony. All right, let's move to the last point because we've gone over time slightly, and it doesn't look like we're going to get any calls. I think that people are probably a little bit scared to call in. As this is a real hotbed issue, a lot of people are afraid to give their opinion on it. Point number 9 was that to ensure quality coverage of mental health treatment, particularly for young people. The document said the vast majority of Americans with a mental illness are not violent. The administration suggests more needs to be done to identify mental health issues early and aid those affected to find the treatment they need before a dangerous situation develops. As President Obama once said, and I'm quoting, "We are going to need to work on making access to mental health care as easy as access to a gun." Wow. The administration is proposing steps to identify mental health issues early and help individuals get the treatment they need before these dangerous steps develop. Now, I'm sure that we all agree. Maybe I'm wrong. We all agree that all health care needs to be equally available to everybody, rich, poor, and indifferent. But what about the mental health issue? Let's go to Brandon first for this one.
Well, here's some place I think we can really find some common ground. New York has a law called Kinder's Law, and California's version of that is Laura's Law, and it's involuntary outpatient services. And so obviously, having the standard outpatient behavioral psychology stuff more accessible and available will go a long way in this. I think we do also need to take a look at the involuntary outpatient aspect of this and make sure that there are options for somebody that is truly troubled to make sure that they get checked out by a licensed professional. So I would think that everybody could agree that supporting those sorts of measures are the right thing to do here.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you would all agree. I think that one thing that the most recent tragedy dictated was that as a community we need to be a bit more aware of who's around us and what's going on with people, because I think that surely someone must have seen, apart from this guy's mother, that there was something wrong. Am I wrong, or
Well, I think those sorts of facts are going to be in the final report, but it sounds, based on some of the news out there, that there were some indications that he was troubled, and then perhaps if there were an involuntary outpatient type program, that he would have went in and he would have been held and evaluated and probably addressed further from there. I mean, we're obviously never going to know, but it would be reasonable to think that might have caused a different outcome.
Right, because I think that Joe just pointed out in the chat room that his father and his brother knew he was off. I mean, surely family members, when you see a change in someone, if you see change in your brother, you would at least check that they were all right. Surely, I mean, you are right, Brandon. I'm sure we're going to find out more and more as this goes on about the whole situation. But I for me, this really just does highlight a greater need for community, and I still think there is a big stigma attached to mental health. I mean, I'm not ashamed to say I've had counseling in my life, and I think it's really made me a better person. I think lots of people have, but up until like 5-10 years ago, people were not prepared to admit that they'd even had counseling. It was a very kind of it was a very stigmatic issue for people.
Yeah, in fact, we look out for each other, and we ask each other to look out for things. We even ask people to make sure that we're not causing forest fires, and that if you did see something, perhaps a campfire that was left burning after the folks left. You put it out, right? You don't walk by a problem. And I think that is something that we really do need to emphasize here, is we need to make sure that mental health issues are not so stigmatized that we can't talk about them and help our friends and family.
Absolutely. Well, we can. That's the frightening thing about society. We can talk about everything else. We can talk about that someone's gay, someone's having a sex change, all these issues that were taboo, like 10 years ago. Why shouldn't, like you say, there be a place where someone can go in and say, hey, I have mental health issues? Not that I'm saying that sex changes or being gay are in the same category. I'm just using them as examples because I know I'll get hundreds of text messages and messages saying that I'm, anti-transsexual. That wasn't my point.
Well, if they're being bullied, they need somebody to talk to. They need help.
Absolutely.
Right. Xander, may I say something on the mental health issue?
You may.
Okay. Now, I think that being in the mental health profession, and everything's got their untold secrets. Counseling originally started off as, quote, for normal people, for somebody like you who is going through a rough time. What's happened throughout the years now is counselors are now required to diagnose and bill and assess. They have become just like psychologists, for example. So there is a big stigma, whereas counselors used to be just to help average people. The stigma attached to counseling or therapy now isn't normal. It's mental illness. There's a problem. And the system, because of the health care and the way the insurance works, has merged everything together.
Right.
Also, in a way, it's a double-edged sword, because I am all for more mental health and more access to mental health in this country. In Florida, we have the Baker Act, which is the involuntary commitment, and it's a duty to warn, of course. If you feel somebody is a threat to themselves or somebody else, anybody can actually go and file an ex parte petition with the court and have them involuntarily committed. And those sorts of things are good. However,
can you please not say that on my show, because I can see all of my family now trying to get involuntarily committed.
See, but the problem with that, though, is they're now talking about going beyond a duty to warn in the field, where if you just think somebody could be potentially a threat, they're trying to hold the psychiatrist in Aurora, for instance, responsible, now civilly, for the shooting. And that gets into dangerous ground for mental health professionals, because then, do you label somebody crazy? Do you label somebody dangerous? Do you not?
Right.
And that's a very more access, yes, but you have to be.
Marvin just made a very interesting point in the chat room. He said, let me go back. It says, mental health should be a concern, but why is it minced with gun violence? And he wants me to ask why. I think that because some of the recent incidents have been perpetrated by someone with mental health problems. Would you all agree that that's why it's been highlighted in all of this?
Yeah, I think that. I mean, we've got people that you can look at their photographs and their actions and their behavior, and they're clearly insane, and some of them are just visibly evil people.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, I have to take a little bit. You see, I don't think that mental health and evil are necessarily the same thing, because obviously a person who is totally sane, not that I know any, is not going to take a weapon and go and kill a bunch of people. Obviously, it indicates that something is wrong. But I'm not an advocate of mental health, people with mental health issues being evil. Maybe the act of what they've done could be seen as evil,
right,
but not the individual. I'm not splitting hairs. If I'm wrong, any of the team can feel free to disagree with me on that. Marvin just said Hitler killed the mentally ill too, so I suppose that's
Well,
and that's true. You don't want to.
Sorry.
We've Godwin's the chat room.
Absolutely.
We don't want to. One thing we don't want to do, or I feel we don't want to do as a nation, especially being in the field of mental health, is start to stigmatize the mentally ill either. We have to remember that they are people just like you and I who have different problems, and everybody has their own problems to different degrees, and we don't want to start dehumanizing it to the point where we're looking everywhere over the corner of our shoulders, and we each become our brother's keeper. Are you mentally ill? Are you mentally ill? And people start getting locked up left and right because we think they might harm somebody else.
Right. Well,
then people will not seek out treatment. People won't seek out treatment either if it becomes like that. They'll and that's happened in the military quite a bit.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, I must bring this discussion to a close. So, can we kind of sum up a little bit that we agree that the changes need to be made, but we need more information about the changes that are actually being recommended. Would that be a fair assumption?
Who's going to lead on this? Yeah, I think so. I mean, from my perspective, there's certainly some places where we can do some work in our country. I think at this point, though, it's just impossible to know what the president has on his mind outside of these big generalities, many of which I think I'd have to disagree with on that basis alone.
Right. Okay, well, thank you so much to all of you for taking part in this panel discussion. I'm sure you will all be back either together or separately at some time in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tony Lossaco, Brandon Coombs, and Jen Knight. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, that's the end of the show. I want to close by saying I don't think any single law or even a set of laws will prevent every act of violence in our country, but the problem is clearly very complex and should not be used as an excuse for inaction. So changes are really important right now, and the minimum we should expect is, a lessening of the bloodshed that's been happening. Thank you once again to my guest panelists, Jen Knight, Kathy Reynolds, Tony Lossaco, and Brandon Coombs. I'm sorry, Kathy Reynolds couldn't join us because she was sick. We hope you feel better soon, Kathy. Join me next week for my interview with LGBT singer Tom Gose. And thank you all so very much for your continued support. Thank you very much to everyone in the chat room. Thanks to Jen, Joe, Marvin, and everybody else. I love you all. Goodbye. Love, it has been good to me this time around. Things were bound to change when it was